Hello and welcome to the Art of World Building channel. Today's topic is an overview of the channel and what you can expect. The videos are based on my 3-volume series of books called The Art of World Building. While I won't be reading from the text, I'll be covering portions of the same material, and I'll be introducing myself and my world building experience. As we get started, remember to click the like button and subscribe to see more videos. As for me, I'm the author of the most in-depth book series on world building, a podcast, a blog, and courses at World Building University, which I founded. I have over 30 years of world building advice, tips, and tricks for you. Let's begin with a channel overview. For the most part, we are going to be following along with the 3-volume series. The first volume is Creating Life, the second volume is Creating Places, and the third volume is Cultures and Beyond, a kind of catch-all for everything that didn't fit into the first two. In time, I may cover other things as they come up, but I've already got a ton of stuff to show you. I will not be reading from the books. If you want that, there are audiobooks of each. There's also a podcast called The Art of World Building Podcast, and it's pretty much the same thing as this channel, but without the video. The transcripts of those podcast episodes are the same as transcripts of these videos, and they are also available for sale as volumes 4 through 6 in the series. I will be following along with the content of the first 3 volumes, which are the real books, so to speak. So let's talk a little bit about what is in each volume so you know where we are going with all of this. Volume 1 is Creating Life and talks about why we should build a world, or even if we need to, and then it goes on to talking about how to create gods, species and races, world figures like heroes and villains, monsters, plants, animals, and finally undead. The second volume is Creating Places, and it talks about how to create a planet, continents, and land features like forests, mountains, and swamps. It's basically everything about the physical landscape. It's got a big chapter on understanding sovereign powers, so we don't create generic kingdoms with no details of what's going on with that government and how it functions, or what the effect is on people. I did quite a bit of research and condensed it into something easier to digest, focused on what a world builder would need to know to create believable sovereign powers and a better variety of them. After that, we talk about how to actually create a sovereign power and then a settlement. We also talk about travel by land, which in a medieval or fantasy setting is often by horses or wagons, or even mythical creatures like dragons. We figure out how long it would take. There's also a similar chapter on travel by sea, with travel times by sailing and info on ship types. There's another chapter about space travel, including fictional technologies. And then we go on to talking about creating time in history and places of interest, such as supernatural phenomenon located somewhere. And there's a bonus chapter on how to draw maps. For Volume 3, Cultures and Beyond, we talk about cultures and things like readings, whether we should create a language, religion, military groups, the supernatural and a system of magic, and of course magic items, and technology if you're doing sci-fi. And then there's a big chapter on how to create names and another about keeping everything in perspective so that you don't get overwhelmed with the act of building worlds. So this should give you a pretty good overview of the kinds of things we're going to talk about on this channel. The 3 volumes don't need to be read in order, nor do their contents, and this channel's videos can also be watched in any order, except for the 2- and 3-part ones, of course. One of the subjects that tends to trip up world builders is how to get started with anything, or where to start. So throughout the book series and these videos, I give tips on this. These usually come at the end of a chapter or video, after we've discussed what we can do and how. There are more tips on the website, which is artofworldbuilding.com, which acts as a central hub for the books, podcasts, videos, articles, and everything else. If you are interested in my fiction and to see my own world building in action, you can read a book of mine called The Everfiend, which is the first Talon Stormbringer book, and you can get this for free by joining my fiction newsletter. The link for that is at fiction.randyellefson.com/newsletter. So why should you follow my advice? Well, I have been world building for over 30 years. Much of my work has been a very deep dive on a single planet, but I've also built other worlds for just a single project like a short story or a one-off book, with far less detail. I've done everything in my book series, often more than once, and I have some advice about when to take various approaches. My world-building books are the longest and most in-depth available. I think they're also the only ones with a bibliography, and an extensive one at the end of each book. This means I researched everything to make sure I gave you the most up-to-date and accurate information, so it's not just my opinion and experience. This is backed up by research. The books are consistently in the top 40 or 20 of all writing reference books on Amazon, and usually far above any other world-building book. They are increasingly found in public libraries, and you can request it in yours by downloading the library request form in the video description, printing it out, and handing it to your local library at the front desk. so you still don't even have to buy this. You can get the info for free. I'm also the founder and lead instructor at Worldbuilding University. I have a few courses out now, and more are in development. The podcast I already mentioned has almost 50 episodes recorded, and over 50,000 downloads as I record this. And I frequently answer world-building questions on Quora, forums, and Facebook groups on the subject. I've spent the last 5 years creating all of this, so I have a lot of experience. I also have a couple really good endorsements, including from New York Times bestselling author Piers Anthony. He read all 3 books and had a few especially cool things to say, so here are a few quotes from all 3 of his reviews. He said the books are amazingly informative, exhaustive, well-written, and knowledgeable. I, as a successful science fiction and fantasy writer, have generated many worlds, so this material is familiar, but it would have been easier and probably better had I had a reference like this. It is realistic, recognizing that the average writer may not have the patience to work out all the details before getting into the action. I have been writing and selling novels for more than a half-century, and I have been learning things here. This is useful for new writers and surely for established ones too. I recommend all 3 books for those who are serious about the worlds they create. So when it comes to my chapter on inventing names, he had this interesting remark. I have a small collection of books of names, which I use for my characters, trying not to duplicate myself too often. But I see I am an amateur in this respect. Every section of this volume is similarly detailed. I also got endorsements from Ed Greenwood, the inventor of the Forgotten Worlds and dozens of other worlds. He also read the series and has my favorite quote. Ellefson is a master of his craft, and it shows. He also said that the books are not just recommended, but essential. Unlike most references, these are fun to read, not to mention a good and spark for the imagination. Masterful overview of world building, carefully and coherently dealing with every last detail. Highly recommended. You can read their full comments on the website on the page for each book, or on the Amazon product pages. As for my writing career, by mid-2020, when I'm recording this, I've written 12 nonfiction books and published 7 of them, with more coming out in the next year, some under a pseudonym. I've also written 7 novels, having published 3 of them under another name, and then there's a novella that's available, and I've written a dozen short stories. 3 of those were recognized by the very respected Writers of the Future contest. My fiction focus is mostly on fantasy. I'm also a composer and guitarist with a bachelor's of music in classical guitar, but I was always more of a rocker. I have released 3 albums of my own instrumental rock or metal, an album of classical guitar, and 1 album of acoustic guitar instrumentals. I've also earned endorsements from Alvarez Guitars, Morley Pedals, and Peavey, and have another YouTube channel for the music. You can get free MP3s by joining my music newsletter at music.randyellefson.com. My day job is as a software architect in the Washington, D.C. area, where I've worked for the State Department, NASA, and at the Pentagon, among others. For all of these, I've written a lot of technical documentation and done presentations, and hopefully it shows. I also had my own consulting company for about a decade. And of course, I'm a single parent to 2 awesome little kids that keep me even busier, though I manage to get out for a round of golf here and there, do my lap swimming, or hit the big roller coasters at the local amusement park when the kids are with their mother. I can also be found at wine festivals or eating sushi. I want to mention a couple little things that affect all of the episodes. The first is that I'm going to be talking about fictional characters that we might want to invent, and I may just go with the male pronoun he and not say he, she all the time. This is not meant to be disrespectful, it's just easier. I also tend to use the word species rather than the word races, and we'll talk about why in the video about that, but I just wanted to point it out now. Throughout the videos on this channel, I'm going to be talking about fantasy and science fiction, and just to make sure we're on the same page, by fantasy I generally mean a world without modern technology. It can be something like The Lord of the Rings, where there's knights, castles, magic, and fictional creatures like dragons. And for sci-fi, usually we're talking about technology that doesn't exist on Earth yet. It might be a future state of Earth, or it might be on entire other planets like in the Star Wars universe, where there's no connection to Earth. But generally, they have technology that we do not have. Much of the world-building advice is really applicable to both of these, but if I do specifically talk about something being for fantasy, or for being sci-fi or science fiction, depending on what you want to call it, I'll bring that up at the time, but most of the advice will cover both. Alright, that's all for today's episode. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to see more videos. You can find a link to the Art of World Building site and books in the description below. There's also a link to the free book, another for World Building University, and the newsletter sign-up link that will net you over 20 templates that you can use throughout your hobby or career as an author or game designer. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.